All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome. Another Sunday, another podcast episode. This week will be more in line with the stuff that we usually talk about after last week's very interesting and very heavy medium interview, which was super cool. If you haven't checked that out yet, please go over to the YouTube channel and take a look at that. That was a super great episode that was outside of our normal wheelhouse of things, but
Dan, we had a
it was
medium
great.
on last week. It was pretty dope. You're still muted.
Still muted there, Dan.
You had a psychic medium on?
We did.
Yes, dude. Yes.
Like I talked to the dead?
Yeah.
Yes.
How did that go?
It was
Give me the rundown on that.
It was super great. I don't want to like spoil anything for you because it is up on YouTube and I just go watch it. It's a long one. It's like 2 hours long, but it's it
I'll
was
summarize
great.
by saying I was not expecting anything close to how it all played out.
This is true.
Nah,
I came
I
in
was not
I came in open-minded and a little bit skeptical because I've always been skeptical of that stuff, and I am now very less skeptical about it after last week's
One,
interaction.
I think I'm gonna have to check that out.
It was so good.
I'm glad that you brought that up early because there was one thing I wanted to say about that to tie it in for people who did watch that last week. She was talking about how like that spirit presence was like waking her up in the middle of the night.
When she was trying to take a nap, like your granddad, pretty much.
Yes, correct. So I didn't even tie it together during the show, but he was cancer research at Ball State University, and he would do like tests on my mom, not like that, but like he thought that there's a correlation between cancer and how healthy your body was and how your fingernails and your follicles grew. And he used to wake my mom up in the middle of the night, and he used to say sunrise in the swamp and like kind of joking around, but he was like kind of like wide-eyed because that was when his research was happening. And I went back and re-listened to it, and she's like, yeah, this guy wakes me up in the middle of the night like with these wide eyes. And my mom listened to it and she was like, Alex, say sunrise in the swamp, say sunrise in the swamp. Like my mom,
She's just yelling at YouTube, wanting you to say it.
yeah, my mom was like, no, everything that she described is exactly my father to a T.
That's
So
crazy.
it was wild, dude.
It was a good one.
wild.
My
Yeah,
mom-
listened to it.
My mom actually watched it while she was at work, and she was texting me, and she was like, "Why didn't you give me any type of disclaimer?" She's like, "I had to shut my door to my office because I was crying." And it wasn't even about the stuff that was about me. My mom went like full mom mode on God dang it! Of course, her name what was her name again?
Emily?
Emily. Yes, I knew it was an E. I wanted to say Erin for some reason. Just went like full mom mode on Erin when Emily was talking about her life and like how her grandma didn't like come to her wedding and stuff like that. My mom was like, I just wanted to go give her a hug.
Yeah, it was a good episode, man.
It was super good.
I will check that out. I'd be interested to see you guys have a conversation with a medium.
It was very interesting. It was very cool. I don't think so, Combo. Actually, I don't think my dad has watched the podcast yet. If he hasn't messaged me about it. I don't know. My mom, when she was talking to me, said something about along the lines of like maybe it wasn't time for dad to watch it yet or something. I don't know. I'll have to see. But anyway, this week we're back to our regularly scheduled programming, I guess. Talking about the Delta variant and everything that is coming out about that, and all the shit we're gonna probably have to start doing again. Some of the things I already have to do now. And we're also gonna talk a little bit. We're gonna talk some shit on socialism, which is why Dan's here.
Have to be the bastion of reason, the bastion of progress. You gotta have one of the three.
And we're also going to talk about how little Biden's done since he's been in office. It's been, what, over 200 days now?
Yep, it's just past 200 days.
Just past 200 days, and all that man has said in every fucking interview is, hey, man, it's only been 100 days. It's only been 200 days. You got to give me some time. Bitch.
You know what the 100 days stems from, right?
Uh,
Like why that's an important amount of time? Like why that historically, like presidents are supposed to start implementing policy?
I
know.
I probably
will tell
do,
you.
but it's been since
It's not based in
buried.
the U.S. It's actually the amount of time that Napoleon was back on the throne when he left, not Corsica, but where he was imprisoned on St. Helena. So between when he arrived and on his march back to Paris, like the Bourbon dynasty sent, 50, 60, 70,000 troops to stop him. They all defected. He gets to the capital. He's in power for 100 days, and then the defeat at Waterloo happens. And like he was able to implement a lot of dynastic reforms in that 100 days. So that's why we here in the West colloquially refer to like your first 100 days in office. Like that's the benchmark. Like that's about when you should see real, genuine reform. So that's where that comes from.
Interesting. I feel like I
But-
probably knew something about that, but when I took my AP like United States government class way back in high school, but it's been years. So like it sounded vaguely familiar, but
No, everybody I'm sure at some point learns it, but they forget that's where it came from.
Yes,
Very interesting.
Danny is a comrade.
He's a comrade.
As I think you would describe yourself as that, right? I don't mean to speak for you. I don't know if you have the comments up either, which you don't have to, obviously. But
Oh, that's okay. So
Combo
I,
asks, so Danny
I
is a
would,
comrade.
I would describe myself as a Marxist-Leninist. The problem in that depiction of myself is that communism is like if we're going to imagine communism as like a thing that exists, there are pathways to get there. You can't go from capitalism to communism. It doesn't work that way. In that way, China, North Korea, Vietnam, and the former USSR, none of those were communist entities. They were state socialism en route to communism. That's the ultimate goal. The goal is to not need a bureaucratic state. The goal is to not need any of it. And that's what communism is. But I don't personally describe myself to people in that sense because it skips so many steps in between. And with McCarthyism and the Red Scare, people just get really spooked about what it is that you're talking about. So colloquially, depending on who I'm talking to, I would probably say that I'm a leftist, or I would say that I'm a socialist. But if I can break down the nuts and bolts and I can have a conversation with like a fellow history degree holder, like to that effect, like then those words don't have connotations and they just mean what they mean. For example, like neoliberal, like that's a word that you can use in a pejorative sense, but like ever since the Reagan years, we have run a neoliberal free market economy. Whereas if you say that to the average Joe, they're not going to get that. There's a connotation associated with it where they don't understand that what you're referring to is an economic policy instead of a political stance. Do you see what I'm saying? So in order to not confuse people, that's what I would typically identify as a Marxist-Leninist or a socialist in pursuit of communism. But an outright communist is just, it just spooks too many people. I wouldn't say it at a party, but I would have that hanging up in my living room.
so in saying like outright communism would be like the ideal outright communist thing would be that there's no government, basically, like no bureaucracy, and everyone's literally working for the betterment of each other together. How I guess the main definition of it is as like a commune, which is what people I guess tried to set up in the 60s and 70s, and everybody called them crazy.
Yeah, the goal of communism is to achieve a stateless society. That's the easiest, like that's just the bare bolts definition of it. But there are many, many different competing methodologies for how to go about achieving that. Like just in a leftist circle, there are a ton of people who would argue with you that China is state capitalist. They're not socialist. They're not left-leaning. They're authoritarian. They're what we would call an illiberal democracy. Like, so it can get super convoluted, especially on my end of the spectrum, where a lot like the vocal majority that you mostly hear from are what I call like Twitter anarchists. Very loud. They want to get rid of the state. They think the state's bad, and that's cool. But what is your plan to do that, other than what? Cancel people? You're gonna cancel the government? Come on, this is not a spot snap thing that happens.
Well,
so.
And I'm not a Marxist at all. In fact, I think if we got down to the nuts and bolts of it, I would say that I'm anti-Marxist. But I will say this for Karl Marx. He started off on a path that wasn't so burn it all down. You know, he just got frustrated enough along the way that by the end, when he was he killed? I think he was killed, right?
No, he died in
He died
Vienna.
Okay, gotcha.
And Marx himself was not a political person. The people
No.
forget that he was an economist. That's it. He said if we follow capitalism to its natural conclusion, or to its inevitable conclusion, we'll end up with monolithic corporations like Amazon, Bank of America. That like when people are when profit is the primary motive, eventually there can only be one left, and as a result, that innovation that capitalism talks about, and that that wherewithal bootstraps kind of mentality that Adam Smith mentions in what a lot of people confuse to be one book, but is actually a series of books, Wealth of Nations. Marx is saying that there are inherent contradictions in that in that kind of political system, or that kind of economic system, that inevitably take away the very things that people like about capitalism. I love that there's 1,000 brands of phone I can buy, but if we're looking at it realistically, they're all made by 3 companies. And at what point do you have to innovate? I mean, Alex, Ben, and I mean, the 3 of us can't go out and start a company today to compete with Walmart. That's like, so Francis Fukuyama, I'm sure you guys have heard of him, famous historian or economist from Japan. So Fukuyama dubbed the term, we've reached the end of history, and that's with neoliberalism. As a result of that, he thinks that capitalism is the final stage of like human evolution, or societal evolution rather. Like, this is it. Like, neoliberalism is a perfect system. And like, he did that, I believe, in like 91, 92. And that's pretty much been gospel since the Reagan years, is that, especially with illiberal, but like it fails to take into account illiberal democracies. You can have tyrants rule under capitalism. So communism is an attempt to perform a different version of productivity in which people are fed according to their need. And the problem with most of the internet left, and I would argue the left in general, is they get super caught up with virtue signaling, not enough reading, not enough organizing, not enough donating, and they end up in effect doing nothing other than like occasionally mutual aid projects, which aren't bad, which are good, but
that's what I'm glad you circled back to that, because especially like you see the Twitter warriors, the keyboard warriors, right? Who a lot of times, if they're on their phone, is an iPhone, which is made in China, you know. So it's not to stand up. They might feel, or that specific genre of Twitter users might feel like they're, you know, hey, I'm doing something good here, you know. But at the end of the day, all they want by tweeting that is for someone to hit the heart button and somebody to hit the retweet, so they can go
that little endorphin rush. Right? That's all they want.
That's all that they care about. They're not. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, they probably really do want the world to be a better place, right? But that's not the root of what sparks them to go on to Twitter half-cocked about shit that they really don't have any idea. Like, I am pretty invested, and I spend a fair amount of time trying to figure out how the world runs and how to make this place a better place. And I consider myself a dumbass when it comes to like politics and how all that shit functions, you know. But if you're just saying these hot button, you know, words on Twitter, and the only sole response, or the only sole goal, is to get a like and a retweet, you should just stop. Like, go back to tweeting whatever you were tweeting, because you're going to spark someone else, similar to like what Donald Trump did on the right, correct? Like, he was just trying to rile up a mob. You're going to create this like mentality, this tribalism of these people who are all tweeting the same thing. And after a while, it just becomes gospel. It just becomes
it's a toxic back padding environment in which those who don't do the work are somehow still like a part of the movement. I get, like, that's my big break with, like, for example, Anarchism. Like anarchism is pretty much the end goal of capital, or the end goal of communism, right? I disagree and have a strong disdain for many anarchists because a lot of it is just, puffing up your chest and yelling iPhone bad, Trump bad.
Burn it all down.
And
Burn it
and
all to
and
the
then
ground.
and then my argument as a historian and as a Marxist and as a communist would be, what necessary education do you have to implement that? And there are instances, okay, we can argue all day whether the USSR was good or bad, whether China's good or bad, North Korea, pick your communist regime, right? But they exist and they're achieving real material things, whereas the only anarchist revolutions that have ever happened that come to mind have been, you could argue Haiti was one of them when they overthrew the slave owners, but not really. But most recently, in most recent memory, probably that instance in Portland with the autonomous zone, and then Catalonia in the middle of the Spanish Civil War, and they got fucked up. And I forget, I can swear on this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and the reason they got fucked up is these people don't fucking understand that it's called revolutionary science for a reason. Like, there are things that we know that will work. There are things that we know that will fail. And if you just, like Alex said, run around half-cocked all the time, just ready to fucking go, that doesn't make you a revolutionary. That makes you ignorant. Like, and that's kind of Lenin's whole argument against what he calls left-wing communism. He has a really good book about it. He calls it left-wing anti-communism and infantile disorder, in which he pretty much just takes people like you just said, Alex, and just absolutely crushes them, where he's like, they are a bane. They're just as bad as capitalists. They're just as bad as fascists. They want the same thing that we do, but they're not willing to work for it. They're not willing to help achieve it. And they think that it's just spontaneously going to happen. And like, that is not based in reality. There is no argument you can make where that's based in reality.
Yeah,
fair enough.
And I don't want to dominate the conversation, Ben. Sorry, if you have anything to interject, you go right ahead. The infantile syndrome is really interesting. We studied that. Well, when I was getting my degree in psychology, we touched on it. So it wasn't necessarily in like a political sense, but it still remains true. It kind of goes to like the learned helplessness as well, like that whole sort of realm of thinking. Exactly. I am so helpless that now that's the only thing that I know how to be. And we've talked about it on this podcast before also, where some people suffer really well. Like, some people took the pandemic and they might have said, I'm so sad, I'm so sad, I'm so sad. But now I have a pandemic to blame. And now this is the reason why I'm sad. So it triggers that, like, that circle of like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm just stuck.
By that extension, those people also like remove themselves from the equation. A large part of an individual's human suffering, I'm not saying all. I want to be very, very clear. I'm not saying all, but a non-insignificant portion of your own suffering is more often than not caused by you.
Bingo.
It's that simple. Like, I don't think that's controversial. Like, I studied psychology. I know you studied psychology. I know that Ben's handsome. I mean, we're all on the same page.
Yes, you're exactly right.
Most people bring about their own, like, take their pity parties to extremes and then internalize them, and then that's where they're stuck. And they just sit there with, like Alex was saying, their own, own suffering, and then play the victim on a lot of things and want society to prop them up rather than take responsibility and look at themselves and do something about their own situation.
Well, and that's easier, right?
Because that's the path of least resistance, is to get somebody else to fix your problem or blame your problems on something else.
Instead of looking at yourself in the fucking mirror and saying, like, I have had times in my life, I'm not projecting this on anyone, where I've looked in the mirror and I'm like, dude, I'm a fucking loser. Like, I am not behaving the right way. I'm drinking too much. I'm partying too much, whatever the case may be. My priorities are not in line, and I need to fix this. Like, so again, I'm not saying that like everyone else in the world needs to look at themselves in the mirror and be like, oh, I'm fucking way better than you. Like, you're the goddamn loser. You need to look yourself in the mirror. I've been there.
Yeah.
As a younger individual, looking at myself in the mirror, being like, I don't fucking like who I'm looking at right now, and I need to make changes to make sure that, because I don't like this. I don't like looking at myself and being like, dude, you're a fucking loser. You need to figure it out.
But you also have the emotional intelligence to recognize that. That's very difficult for people, and it's especially difficult for people who don't have access to mental health services.
Yeah.
Or if you can get on the Twitter webs and make a tweet, and then I get so much emotional support from
it gets 1,000
you
likes.
you get your
from likes and
validation from
retweets.
strangers on the internet, and that makes you feel a little bit better for the day.
There's a term for that I can't quite recall off the top of my head. There's
Stupidity?
a material term for it. Well, you could say that.
I missed that.
I was trying to think of
It's stupidity. It's called being stupid.
Oh yeah, well, yeah.
When your validation for your entire life and well-being comes from the likes and retweets and whatever else of morons on the internet. Joan Stones says parasocial relationships. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, parasocial relationships are part of it, but a parasocial relationship would be a relationship that you would have with, for example, like a popular YouTuber, where you feel connected to them, you feel a false sense of friendship with them. They don't know you exist.
Right.
So a parasocial relationship applies to many things. It could apply to a YouTuber, it could apply to a podcaster, it could apply to an author, it could apply to an actor. And those typically don't get... I think technology has made it more difficult to not be toxic with it, because I can tweet right at you. I can tweet at Chris Evans, you're a fucking loser, and I hope you fucking die. Well, I don't think you can, actually. But I don't know about
No,
Twitter.
you can, but then somebody will take it down somewhere.
Okay, yeah, okay. So some dude deletes it. But anyway, so parasocial relationships are relationships that you believe that you have with an author or a creator to some extent, where you internalize that. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking specifically about the gratification that you get from online discourse. The gratification you get from, because it's usually not a debate. It's usually a sharp poignant comment that garnishes a lot of likes.
Yeah.
So that's not the same as a parasocial relationship, but a parasocial relationship, those occur often, and those are very problematic. I would agree with them there.
Well, and I'll plug the social dilemma again right now. If you haven't seen that, go watch it, because you'll start to understand really how all of those social media apps work to consume your attention, because they have advertisers that they get paid, based on the amount of attention that you give to that app. So we've talked about this before, and I don't want to, we're already derailing, which I think is fantastic, because we don't ever really have like a specific agenda. And that already made me lose my train of thought. I don't necessarily think it's like, I think there's plenty of fault to be found in Twitter, but not necessarily the fact that you're spending all of your time and energy and effort on this one app and trying to retain that serotonin boost just based on like a like or a retweet.
Yeah, it's like a Pavlovian response. I said
Exactly.
something, other people like it, releases dopamine, makes me feel good. That's not necessarily the problem. The problem is when you run into situations where you have people that are like what you may call like terminally online, if you're familiar with that phrase.
It's basically like an addiction. They're addicted to being on social media and that rush that they get every time somebody likes or retweets or comments or whatever on whatever they post.
And you see it. I would argue that, well, here's the thing. I'm not super involved in Twitter. Some of the content creators that I work with and, follow are on Twitter. So I'll get on Twitter maybe every day, every other day, like in the morning, but you see it a lot with Facebook. I mean, and some of it is just flat out gross. Like you've got people like sharing photos with them and like their dying grandparent, and you're like, what is wrong with you? Like, do you have any humility? Like, there are things that do not belong online, in my opinion, and to post stuff like that for clout chasing is, I think, just like, I think it's gross. I'll admit that's just a personal opinion of mine, but I think it's gross. Like if one of my good friends in real life started doing that and not just some rando I went to high school with, I'd have to have a conversation with them about how, like, you're posting like really inappropriate stuff. Like, if you're having a hard time, like, talk to me, talk to somebody else, talk to a therapist, like, do this, that, the other thing. But like Ben was saying, it's so much easier to just pick up your phone and press send, you know? Like, and then you can frame that narrative however you want. And to circle back to Alex, you also get to circumvent and scapegoat any personal responsibility, which is the big problem.
Yeah.
True. Before we go any farther, I just want to say, Chone Stones, welcome to the podcast. This is I think the first time I've seen you here, so welcome and thank you for being active in chat already. Appreciate it. Anyway, moving on.
Let's talk about Joe Biden, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
How hard do you want me to get?
I was about.
I want you to get so hard. Get
I'm
hard
just-
for me,
I feel
Dan.
like I'm
Wait,
just gonna
pause.
Mute. I feel like I'm just gonna mute myself and just let Dan go off and just nod. And again, like, so Dan and I, if you put it on paper, and Ben and I on paper are probably pretty similar politically. Like, if you were checking boxes, you know,
Yeah.
that most people want you to check. And we would be separate from Dan on those same boxes. But when we sit here and chat, what we find is most times we have very similar common goals, maybe a different way to get there, but the goal is the same, you know. And so I just wanted to preface that again. If you didn't see our first podcast with Dan, it ended up being more of us agreeing with each other than it did debating anything.
Yeah, it
You know
was
what I mean?
agreeing,
And I
but
was-
coming at it in different from different directions.
correct. Yeah.
Well, also, to my own credit, I'm not a terminally online leftist loser. So,
Correct.
oh, and I read books. That helps a lot. Helps a lot. If I can speak to the subject, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you straight up. I think, what was the big one last time I was on? Gina, what is her last name? That
Gina
whole
Carano.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys
Yeah.
brought up that discourse, and I didn't know anything about it. And the way that we discussed it, we all came to a pretty ubiquitous conclusion that, like, I mean, free marketplace of ideas. The market judged you had some bad ideas. I'm not saying you shouldn't think them. I'm saying that maybe don't post it. Maybe don't jeopardize your career over it. And then subsequently claim victimhood. That was my only real conclusion that I had from it. Like, I didn't have a problem that they were saying it. I had a problem that they were, I guess, out, like you guys would say, getting, like, quote unquote canceled over it. Whereas, like, if I'm Disney and I'm a multi-billion-dollar company, or maybe trillion, who the fuck knows, dude, with Disney.
Right.
If my job is dependent on being a literal public figure in movies, TV, all that good stuff, there is a certain expectation that you have for behavior. Now, we can debate whether or not that's fair and that's just and that's okay. But at the end of the day, if your employer sees what you're doing online and says, I think Alex or Ben are acting like fucking assholes and I don't want them working for me, that's kind of fair, really.
Well,
I mean,
we'll
might
come
not be right, but
We'll come back around to that in the New York vaccine passport idea. But anyway, Joe Biden.
Alex,
Biden.
just start us out with whatever you want to talk about on that, and then we'll go from there. So, just kind
you
of
bring it up, I'll talk for about 45 uninterrupted minutes. You'll see my camera shaking a little bit, you know, kind of like, you know,
Well,
but
so kind of what the jumping point will be is there was a tweet that he made while President Trump was in office about, you know, it's been 8 months and Donald Trump still doesn't have a plan for the vaccine. I do, you know. And now here we are in the middle of another, you know, Delta variant, which think what you want about it. there's really not a set plan in place. He hasn't done anything.
He really hasn't.
I guess is what the end all and be all of it is. Like, we're not in a better position or a worse position. We're just kind of still exactly where we left off when he took office. And I would argue, in fact, it's gotten worse because we've just invited people from the border, which, again, like, you can make your argument at pro-immigration, anti-immigration, whatever. But I think we can all agree, in the middle of a pandemic, it's not a good idea to just invite immigrants to the border and just say, we're just going to let you all in, which is what's happening. There was a couple in a Whataburger in my hometown in the Valley who was sitting there like sneezing and coughing, no mask on. And Border Patrol, the police, I forget, Border Patrol or police showed up, and we're kind of asking them, like, what, how'd you get here? And they're like, hey, we showed up to the border. Basically, we got dropped off stateside, and now we're just trying to find somewhere to go. And they all three tested positive for COVID.
So probably asylum seeker then, more than likely.
No, not asylum seeker. Show up to the border. That's what's happening on the border right now. Thousands of people are showing up, and we're accepting them all in. And some of them get put in these camps, so they can be, what's the word I'm looking for?
Processed.
They can be checked out, processed. There's another word that I'm looking for.
Screened.
We can screened. We can find out if they're there and they're an MS-13 cartel member, or if they're really just trying to come across the border to seek, a better life. But the problem is that they're so overwhelmed at the border right now that process can't happen for each and every single person. So there again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. By the way, Canada, just for the first time, opened up its borders for fully vaccinated people. So it's not like we're sitting on an island. The rest of the world is saying, hey, we're doing this also, so USA should really open its borders. It's a problem, and
you're arguing it's
I hate the fact that Fox News uses it as a talking point, because it gets blown out of proportion from them. And you guys know I hate Fox News just as much as I hate CNN. And I wish they wouldn't even talk about it, because it just becomes another political talking point that nobody's really doing anything about. But I have friends and family that still, not necessarily family, friends that I would call family, let me say, still in that area that are living it and breathing it every day. And they're like, no one is coming to help us. Like, we're just releasing illegal immigrants into this country who are COVID positive. Like, we're not making this situation better. We're so concerned about wearing masks and, the vaccine passport in New York. And we want to say on this national level, and mostly media talking heads, that we care so much. That's the foundation of why we put all these things into play, is because we care about you as American citizens. Motherfucker, no, you don't. You care about votes. That's what you care about. And all this shit happens behind the scenes, and it just goes unchecked, and nobody talks about it except if you're Fox News, and then it's used again as a political talking point. But there are real issues that are happening while we just shift our attention elsewhere, and nothing has gotten better. I would argue that it's gotten worse since Joe Biden has been in office. And I think I could make a substantial argument that, again, we're not talking like devastation, like we're getting ready to launch, we're not accessing the nuclear codes to, fire at North Korea or whatever. But at the same time, I would argue that nothing has gotten better. And if anything, we've taken steps backwards.
I would agree. I mean, anybody who knows me IRL would absolutely tell you it's not like a flex. I'm not being polite. One of my favorite Twitter accounts, I think I brought it up one of the last times I was on the show, was I brought up the Twitter account, which everybody should follow. It's really good. It started as what has Joe Biden done in his first 100 days in office? And now I think they've changed their name to what campaign promises has Joe Biden still continued to lie about? This is another one of those. I would agree with you wholeheartedly that the COVID situation, specifically the COVID situation, has gotten worse under Joe Biden. And that doesn't come as a surprise to me because he has fundamentally not attacked the problem because he doesn't want to. That was never the plan. The plan was never to do what the rest of the world did, literally send people. What's the name of one of those meal providers that like they'll send like a fucking week's worth of food to your house?
Like Meals on Wheels or something like that, or
No, not like a.
oh, like the subscription service deals.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. HelloFresh. There you go. Chone Stones, my man.
Perfect. Okay, so, what pretty much like most countries in the world that have handled it well have pretty much done a government subsidized version of that, and then they just paid people to stay home for 8 weeks. We could have been fucking done with this. I mean, Vietnam is a really, really, really good example. Vietnam also happens to be a communist nation, where the second they got, I think it was 3 COVID positive tests in the last 2 weeks, they immediately shut their borders down. China's done the same. A lot of Europe has followed suit, but in the United States, like, I think it's fucking bananas that here we are a year and a half later, and with the Delta variant like pacing back up, or upticking rather, we are going to have to quarantine again. And I just don't understand why we, like, because the three of us, I mean, how fucking smart can we be, right? You know, like realistically, how is it that 3 normal people can come to the conclusion that, well, what's the best course of action to stop the spread of the virus? Okay, it has an incubation rate of about 2 weeks, usually lasts about 2 weeks. Pay everybody to stay at home for 8 weeks and deliver them food. And then that's what like Vietnam has done. That's what they've done in China. They have also done in Laos, Cambodia, a couple other non-communist nations. But like the fact of the matter is they need this to get over so that their countries can continue to move forward. However, in the United States, whether it was under Trump, who I would agree with you, Alex, I would argue did more to combat COVID. I mean, rude asshole for sure about it. But first very things out of Joe Biden's mouth were elect me president, $2,000 check, $15 minimum wage. We'll talk about Medicare for all. He's done none of that. Like there's a multitude of things that Joe Biden promised that he has not delivered on. And he has made COVID worse by doing what liberals always, they have fucking goldfish memories, man. Liberals do this thing where they just like, orange man's out, orange man bad, blue man's in now, things are all right. And then when people like me point out the hypocrisy of you are overhauling Trump's military budget, you're overhauling his defense aid to Israel, and you're overhauling the process at the border, what the fuck is that about? And what you won't hear one of those cabinet members say is, well, the border patrol like camps, call them what you will, I'd say a concentration camp for a concentration of people, internment, what have you.
Detention centers, yeah.
Detention centers, sure. Or if you're a liberal, I don't know what the fuck a liberal would call them anymore, but
processing center, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Point is, they've fundamentally done nothing to stop the spread of this fucking virus. We know what it costs, not even in the death toll or like human suffering and misery. Fucking, you need to pay people to stay home. Everybody's bitching and moaning right now about like nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to work anymore. And nobody's talking about the fact that we have nearly 1 million people who are no longer alive who were working last year. There's not an inflated or artificial labor shortage. It's not people staying home. There literally are 1 million less people to work the jobs that we had while we had an unemployment rate of, what was it, Alex or Ben, under Trump? It was like 6%.
It was 6% and falling.
Yeah. And now it still hovers between like 5 and 7.
The last thing I saw recently in the past couple of days, I think I was out somewhere and I saw something. I was either online or the TV somewhere where I was at. We are down to like 5.4% unemployment. I don't know how accurate that is, but
run that by me again. I cut out.
Oh, we're like at like, I think the last thing I saw was like we're at like 5.4% unemployment. I think is where we're sitting at. That was like something recently I just saw. Like, I think it was actually on my TV in the house. I like had Peacock on trying to like catch glimpses of the Olympics and like the news jumped on for a second, and it was like there's been like 900,000 that seems excessive, but there's been a bunch of new jobs added, and unemployment's down to like 5.4%.
And I do want to tell, I think it's Tonez. I don't know.
I don't know. Correct us if we're saying your name wrong.
Yeah, we'll answer that question. We saw it. The question was, wouldn't Stones? Okay, wouldn't nuking North Korea be a step forward in his opinion? I'm not exactly sure.
Regarding what?
I'm not exactly sure, and I don't know whose opinion when it.
I think we were still talking about Biden and progression forward. I think,
and that's going to launch a whole nother conversation that we're going to get into about North Korea and Joe Rogan interviewing the defector who managed to escape North Korea at a young age, which again, you guys know I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, and you can think what you want about him, and you don't have to love him, and you don't have to watch every episode. But if you watch one, just solely, there's no real political talk. It's just him interviewing this lady.
It's important to never forget that Joe Rogan's podcast reaches about 30 million people a week. Period. Yeah. Period.
Yeah. More than any mainstream news media outlet is
by a factor of like 5 to 6.
Yeah,
it's not close.
So anyway, I don't want to. If we're done talking about Joe Biden, that's fine. Because again, I think we could sit here and we all agree that he's not doing anything.
He's really he's not. He's not done shit. He's making it worse. Making it worse. And when we were like, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of him right now, just off the sole fact that like now as a Department of Defense employee, we're back to wearing masks again, and I'm like, bro, why? It's not. I could get on a whole tangent of how ineffective these are for people that are healthy, but anyway.
I think it's super awesome that we actually have your voice in for the vaccine conversation, because you don't get a fucking choice. The government is shooting that shit in your ass.
Essentially, we have a choice. We have a choice right now. Right now, it's not like the other vaccines that we get as military members, which, we don't have an option for it. And sometimes when you deploy to different countries or whatever, you get vaccines for diseases in those countries that obviously you're not exposed to. So you have to get vaccinated for those. COVID was one that was optional because everybody was so fucking worked up about it coming out so fast, and they're like, oh my god, it's not FDA approved, blah blah blah, and all this other shit. And they made it optional for now. Biden recently has come out and said that I think by October he's going to make it mandatory for all government employees, which includes the military and all DoD civilians and contractors that are part of that. So by October, everyone's going to have to get it. My thing with this is that we need to stop focusing on the vaccine and going, oh, the vaccine's bad, the vaccine's this, the vaccine's whatever. There's nothing wrong with the goddamn vaccine. All right,
the vaccine is reality.
The problem that it had on the Johnson & Johnson side got recalled, and they were working on fixing it. It's unfortunate that those people died, and obviously nobody wants to hear. We don't want people to die from a freaking vaccine or anything like that. But that's been addressed. The thing of it is everyone's worked up because it came out so fast, and they're like, oh, it hasn't been researched or whatever, or fully vetted or anything like that, and that's just not true. That vaccine for.
I'm so glad that we can all fucking agree on that, and the idea that one of my favorite retorts to that is one of George Washington's one of the first things he did when he was placed as Supreme Commander of the United States Forces was vaccinated his soldiers against smallpox. You are living in a parallel reality if you think this is about freedom, right to choose. None of that shit applies when it's a contagion, when it's a deadly pandemic. And the amount of the sheer amount of cognitive dissonance you need to understand that we've almost lost 1 million fucking people in this country. Most people know someone who at the very least got sick. A lot of people had to say goodbye to their parents, their brother, their sister, their grandparents. And then to watch people get on TV and loudly yell about freedom of speech or not freedom of speech, I'm sorry, but freedom of movement and it's unconstitutional, you get that like your whole big thing is claiming to be like American exceptionalism. The only thing you're being exceptional at right now is being a selfish, uneducated fucking asshole. Because at the end of the day, it's probably not statistically going to be the three of us dying of COVID, but it is going to be that elderly cashier worker who picks up extra hours at night so that she can potentially buy her grandkids something nice. Like, you're a selfish asshole and you should feel shame. You should.
And my opinion on this has been the same ever since we were talking about the mask mandates. It's hard to believe that was like a year ago, but that's been like
over a year ago. How fucking nuts! Like where, well over a year ago.
Yeah, to where I don't want Papa Government telling me I have to wear a mask. I want to make that choice myself because I want to be neighborly to those around me. Same thing with the vaccine. I don't want Papa Government, especially with the vaccine. Now you're crossing over even like the next step. You're taking the next rung up the ladder to where it's like, okay, well, now you're telling me that I have to do this. I don't want to be told that I have to do this. I want to get the vaccine because it is neighborly, or I think it's the right thing to do.
Or you're secure that it's safe.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I want to tag in real quick on your side. The argument that big government should not be the one telling people that they need to get these vaccines is deeply a fair criticism. When you look at what happened with under the guise of vaccination, a bunch of fucking foster kids got infected with syphilis as a test, as like a fucking test. And a bunch of African Americans under the guise of flu shots caught not smallpox. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like that was in like the fucking 60s, man. Like MK Ultra shit. Like there is an argument to be made that the vaccine or that the government can't mandate this for me. But if it is catered to all, your fear that it may be like an MK Ultra kind of thing kind of sort of doesn't, it still holds a little weight, because I'm gonna say that that's a good argument. But if it's like, if everyone has to get it, and like the only people who aren't are weirdos that are buying like $500 vaccine passports and shit because they think that, like, I don't even know what they're afraid of anymore, because I don't know what they even know about it. Are they afraid that like RNA is somehow going to corrupt their DNA? Are they just being purposefully obtuse? Are they just being argumentative? Like, no. I genuinely don't know what
I think
their issue is.
The issue that people have with it is the fact that they're too lazy to go out and educate themselves about what the vaccine is, how long it's been in development, and the fact and why it got expedited. And then the second part is they're again too lazy to do anything else, and they just listen to the news outlets that say the vaccine's bad and the government's like bad and all this other stuff, and so they just internalize.
They're calling Joe Biden a fucking communist. Yeah, so I fucking wish, dude. Daddy, please, Daddy Joe, come on.
But come on. It's just the main thing of it is people are just too lazy and too dumb to do the research on this stuff themselves, and they're just trying to listen to the loudest voices and take that as gospel. Whereas if they would take 10 minutes out of their day to do any type of research or remember anything from some science class they took way back when, they'd realize that, like I said earlier, the vaccine's not the problem. And getting the vaccine is not the problem. The problem, and I'm with Alex on this, is the overstep of the government coming in and trying to mandate people to get vaccines, and then telling people that you can't go anywhere or do anything without a vaccine passport in order to force them to do something that they don't want to do. If you go out and educate yourself, and after all of your education, like educating of yourself, you still go, you know what, I'm gonna make the personal choice to not get the vaccine. That's on you. Okay, fine. You educated yourself enough and feel confident enough that you're gonna be fine as you are without the vaccine. All right, cool. Or on the flip side, you did all that and you're like, you know what, I am gonna get the vaccine or whatever. But the problem that I have, and I'm in the same, like I said, the same boat as Alex, is when the government comes in to try and mandate it and then restrict where you can and can't go based off your vaccination status.
It's like any other talking point, right? So take the word vaccine out and insert the word terrorist, right? So let's look back to 9/11, where we got the Patriot Act after 9/11, right? Because God damn it, if you're not a patriot, and you don't support this act, you're not a patriot, you might as well get the hell out of here, right? But so if you look at the Patriot Act and how many terrorists it's actually stopped, I believe the number is still 0. But you have
Run that by me again. Run that last sentence by me again.
Yeah. So the Patriot Act has not stopped any terrorist activity within the United States. There has not been
no. No.
You can look back on and say
absolutely not.
All
Same with TSA.
But what it did do
was
is
make travel a pain in the ass.
Remember,
yes.
You ever been on a flight where you could show up, your flight's at 12, you could show up at 11:30 and have a drink? I don't, because these fuckers wrecked it.
Well, and so this is my issue when you're talking about, again, take out terrorists and insert vaccine, whatever the case may be. What happens is you create a situation where the government becomes able to start overstepping their bounds and start overreaching. So in the name of the Terrorist Act being able to, have some sort of solid ground to stand on, we start radicalizing these people in, social media chat rooms or on Facebook who tweet Allah Akbar, and then, some FBI informant messages them and says, yeah, brother, the fight's real. And so then we convince them to ignite a bomb in, any sort of public type of square. They show up, they receive the bomb, and they say, hey, when you're ready to detonate, just hit this button on the cell phone. And then the person really doesn't kind of want to do it, but they're becoming radicalized. And this is a real case. Look it up. So the person's becoming radicalized and they're like, okay, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. Because now they feel like they're part of like a brethren. And so they show up, they hit the button on the cell phone. FBI comes, you're arrested. Now you're doing 20 to life for terrorist activity.
Are you
when they got them on entrapment, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you making the comparison between like a vaccine for the sake of national security and the government entrapping
no I'm gonna
radicalized terrorists?
I'm gonna tie it all together here. Okay, so this is my issue with the government being able to say, hey, you have to do this, and if you want to have the ability to live your life as an American, which is supposed to be free, and as long as you're not hurting anybody, we're not gonna fuck with you. You create the environment to where we can say
you're talking about setting a precedent.
Our goal is to make the nation safer. That's our goal.
Yeah.
But we know what Papa government does in these types of situations. They reach for more power. They reach for more power. They reach for more power. And once they have that power, they don't give it back. So again, if you create this standard or this precedence, and I'm not saying that the vaccine is, we're injecting African Americans with AIDS, or, I'm not saying any of that.
You're saying, although it has happened, you
can create the environment where we can have that happen again. So again, I want to make sure everyone is safe around me, and I want to be neighborly, and I want to try to make sure that the way that I conduct my day-to-day life is being the best person that I can be. But at the same time, I don't want the government coming in and saying, this is what you have to do to be a good person. And if you don't do this, we're going to take away your ability to eat at restaurants. We're going to take your ability away to go into grocery stores. We're going to take your ability away to travel. Again, it's not the vaccine. I'm not talking about the vaccine or its effectiveness or its safeness. Again,
I see what you're trying to say. What I would respond to that with would be that, like, I agree with you that the framing of all of this, especially under Joe Biden, has just been absolute horseshit. Like, from the fucking get-go, they should have been ramping up like they did in like when the Spanish flu hit, which of course I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but Spanish flu originated on a hog farm in Kansas. But it's called Spanish flu because it broke out in Spain. That was where like the worst part of it happened. But like it should have been seen in the same way that it was with the Spanish flu, where like wearing a mask is patriotic. Where but now we have vaccines for it too. So it's like the most American thing you can do. You know, it should be patriotic to go and do that. People should feel incentivized to go and do that. They shouldn't feel that, excuse me, that like there's this fucking like the government is so corrupt at this point that people can't even do basic shit like go and get a vaccine because of like the way that this whole fucking situation has been handled.
Because of their distrust in the government. I was going to say
Because
that earlier.
they're well-earned, well-justified distrust. I understand. That I do understand. But like ideologically, the three of us are on the same page that like it's good to get the vaccine. But like if we're approaching it from a policy perspective, if you need your country to get this vaccine because almost 1 million of your countrymen have died, that's terrible for the economy. Pragmatically, we can view it that way. I don't, but that's a totally good argument. But like just based on that alone, like you should have an incentive to protect the people around you. Like if I'm the government and I'm all powerful and I can write all the fucking rules, you don't just mandate a fucking vaccine, especially after what happened after the Capitol insurrection or the riot, whatever you want to call it, the last 6 years of, you know, fake news, whatever the fuck. Everybody's pushing their agenda so like publicly and so unabashedly and like unshamefully that you're like, I think you're full of shit. But people see that on every single screen, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News. I like it. That's like a totally justifiable conclusion to come to. It's like, you guys are lying and you're stupid and I'm going to turn you off and not listen to you. That's how you get a population that doesn't want to get vaccines. And now we also have the reaction to that, which are people that there was some talk for a moment about like giving everyone who gets the vaccine, like, I think it was $600. I think it was something, it was either 600 or 1,000, something like that. And you still have people who won't do it because you're approaching it from an economic perspective. It's not an economical issue. It's an issue with trust. And because the government has so much, and especially government figureheads have so like crushed it in totality, like trust, assurance, like all of it is fucking gone after the last, I'd argue 25 years, maybe 20. Like every fucking time we do something you guys say, you have fucked us over every single time. Every single fucking time. I'd argue more like 40, 45 years, like starting with Nixon, even. Like every time you guys fucking tell us what is going on, it's not true. Like, how do you build trust on that? And especially in a situation where like the three of us agree, like you should get the vaccine. It's good to get the vaccine. It's important to get the vaccine. How do you relay that to people that are saying like what you're saying, for example, and have the argument that like I kind of laid out? Because like ideologically, I would find it difficult to argue with that person who I don't want to get the vaccine because every single time the government has stepped in the last 25 fucking years, they've made everything a hell of a lot worse for me, my family, and the people I care about. And I don't fucking trust them and I don't want anything to do with it. Like, I find that difficult to argue with. And I did not think that way before we started this conversation.
And that's my whole point is like, yeah, I disagree with you, but I understand where you're coming from. And I can't really disagree with the fact that you have distrust in the government because I don't have trust in the government. Now, I'm not saying that
if that's the place it's coming from, it gets very difficult to argue that.
Yeah.
It gets very difficult to argue that. I think you're full of shit and I don't trust you. Why? Because Joe Biden hasn't done anything that he said he was going to do. We're approaching September. He's had 9 months in office. He hasn't done a goddamn thing. I don't trust him. I watched the TV the other day. He said, go get the vaccine. Fuck that. I'm not going to do it. You can use the exact same reverse logic for Trump and liberals. Like, do you see what I like? I agree. I actually agree with you. And I didn't before.
That's how Trump got into office, was distrust in the government. We're going to drain the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp. It's time for these political figures. Their time's up. My time is now, and we're going to go into DC and we're going to drain the swamp. Now, he didn't drain the fucking swamp. I think we can all agree on that. But at the same time, that's how that motherfucker got to where he was the leader of the free world. You know, again, if it was all sunshine and rainbows and I knew the guy on TV that was the leader of the free world was talking to me and he solely had my best interest at possible, I think our country could be 100% vaccinated by now.
You're just arguing that with the election, you're arguing that with the election of Trump, Trump's whole thing is, I can't be any fucking worse than the last guy.
Exactly.
That's a difficult point to argue because now we have Joe Biden.
Well, yeah, and you can talk about
like we opened
and
he has bungled this. I'll be very honest. I have a disdain for Joe Biden. I very much do. But even I am baffled at how he, like the seemingly super easy hurdles that he had, like the things he got elected for that are easy to do. The Democrats control the House, they control the Senate, they control the Oval Office, and suddenly Nancy Pelosi is getting on TV with Joe Manchin, and she's saying, "Oh well, you know, nothing we can do," or Kristen Sinema, and it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, go to the Senate right now and get rid of the filibuster. Just do it. You can literally do that. It's not a rule. It's not in the Constitution. You can 51-49 just not have it anymore. But you're choosing to not do it because, again, like you said with the whole government distrust thing, they've proven systemically for decades that they don't give a shit about people.
Well, I think Alex and I aren't really surprised that Joe hasn't done fucking anything since he's been in office, because he's been in some political sphere for how long has it been? Like 40 plus years?
45 years. Because
46 years?
He wrote the crime bill in 94, and he interrogated Anita Hill in just like the most evil way I could think of back in the early 70s, late 70s. Maybe somebody in the chat can correct me on that. Like Joe Biden,
he hasn't done
possibly be worse than Trump. That was like our whole fucking argument on the left, is like, you want to think that this career politician is going to be better than Trump, and if you look at his record like you would with any other person who doesn't flame people on Twitter, he's like arguably the worst possible politician to fill that fucking seat.
He is.
He supported segregation. He supported or he was against busing. He wrote the fucking crime bill that we're struggling with today.
Most horrible bill.
He helped make private prisons one of the most important lobbies in the whole fucking country. And now he and Kamala Harris, a fucking cop, are gonna sit here and try to explain to us that they understand, especially after the whole fucking summer of unrest, like where people had just fucking had enough. Like, think of it what you will. That's a defining moment in our lifetimes. Like, absolutely 100%. So it is fucking bananas to me that the bar was so fucking low for Joe Biden. And he has somehow, some way, just like when he was walking up into Air Force One, managed to fall into it, not over it. That's incredible to me. Like,
yeah, I mean, Alex and I just aren't surprised that he hasn't done, like, I wouldn't say overly surprised he hasn't done anything, because he hasn't done fuck all since he's been
1 of 10, like his top 10 list. If he did 1 of 10, I would be like, okay, cool. Like, that was about what I expected. The fact that this man has the balls to run on a campaign platform and then literally follow through with 0 of the things he promised and make things worse than when Trump was in office just speaks to this, like, part of my soul that makes me so angry. Like, you arrogant, racist, sundowning fucking old man. Like, what the fuck? How did it come to this?
Pretty much. Alex, you want to move on to
yeah, we
North Korea?
We can move on because we all agree. I think, because
We essentially do. We're on opposite sides of the spectrum, but we all agree that Joe's fucked this, and there's like, I'm not gonna rehash
I
what we
think
all
it,
just went over.
yeah, I think it helps that, again, not a Twitter anarchist and like an educated individual open to having conversation. I don't think that Alex potentially knows that many people in real life who have as what he might call a well, progressive would be putting it mildly, but different worldview that can sit down and have a conversation with, who like is like, I'm willing to talk about the things that I know, and I'm not willing to have an opinion on things I don't fucking get. Like, I'm just not.
And the last thing I'll say about that whole Twitter sphere and people that I know that have different views from me, but the second, like you mentioned earlier, Dan, the second you disagree with it, you're either a racist or you're a Trump supporter, or you must be some, right wing animal that just doesn't care about people. When you engage with the pigs, you end up dirty, right? When you roll around with the pigs, you always come out dirty. So a lot of times it just is easier for me when I hear other people touting just complete rhetoric bullshit, that I just shut up, because it's not worth it for me to get into a dialogue with that person, because I can make the most pointed, sensical, not even arguments, just points, but you're never going to be right because you're disagreeing with them.
Yeah.
And
it's like, if I wanted to hear my own opinion, I'd go talk in the fucking mirror, man.
Yeah. Like, you can't engage with that.
No, you cannot.
Anyway, we can move on to North Korea then.
All right. Sounds good. So, Alex texted me about this earlier today, and I actually got through probably about the first hour of that podcast, and that thing's like, it's 193 minutes long, which is like, close to, what, 3 hours?
Just shy of 3 hours.
I think. So I got about a third of the way through it. And Joe Rogan, it was recent, and interviewed, her name was like Yeonmi Park.
I think. Park?
Yeah.
She defected.
Well, she was
early aughts, right? 2002,
something like that. She left North Korea when she was 13. She got out when she was 13. She was born in 1993. So she is 28 now, because she's a year older than I am. And she got out and escaped North Korea when she was 13. And the story, the story she tells of her life growing up in North Korea just paints a horrid and vividly horrible picture of what life is like in that country for people that are not in the capital. And at one point, she likened it to the Hunger Games. When she was reading the book, The Hunger Games, she was like, this person is literally talking about North Korea. And
it's
how,
the same thing.
And how the country is divided up into districts, basically. And if you're, in the capital, you're fine. But if you're not in the capital and you live in any of the other districts, like, your life is a literal living hell. Like, when she was growing up, the government did not provide food, does not provide food for the people. They had, literally have to, go out and scavenge and scrounge for food around the countryside. Because
she said that crickets are the number one source of
grasshoppers.
Protein.
Yep, grasshoppers. Yeah. Grasshoppers are the number one source of protein, because they can't, she knew somebody, maybe it might have been a family member or somebody that she knew, or at some point while she was living there, had killed a cow in order to have some food for him and his family, and to have some source of protein, and they executed him, because nothing in North Korea is your own personal property. It's all property of the state. And so for killing a cow in order to live and survive, they executed that person.
So the problem with North Korea is twofold. The first is that we have been taught since the end of the Korean War that North Korea is this is going to be a little long. I apologize. But we've been taught for well over 50 years now that North Korea they're crazy people. They're tyrannical. They think that Kim Jong-un was born or Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, was born under like a double rainbow, shit like that. The problem is that there are a lot of quote unquote defectors that come from South Korea because, or that go to South Korea because there is a very heavy economic incentive to do so. By leaving North Korea and going to the South, you are immediately immersed and flooded with capital. As a result of that, you do occasionally, because I don't live in North Korea. I've never been to North Korea. I don't want to speak too deeply on it, but we can all do the math that if you fucking hate it here and you're admittedly life is hard, you're not getting fed very well, and you can go across the border from like where I'm at, Omaha, over to Council Bluffs, and you can immediately write a book, you immediately get TV performances, you immediately get flooded with a place to stay, cash, all that stuff. There is an economic incentive to defect from North Korea. That's true. The other problem is that there is also an economic incentive to be hyperbolic. Now, I am not saying that every single defector that comes from North Korea is exaggerating. What I am saying is that over time, some of those stories have gotten so hyperbolic that it's difficult to discern. There's a really, really good video by a YouTuber I watch called Bay Area, and he Bay Area 415, and he has done a really good video on the subject where like we're currently suffering from the same problem of lack of information, Cold War rhetoric, and then these defectors, which are kind of handpicked, lead us to conclude that North Korea is like a fucking batshit insane place to be.
It
And
is.
it's difficult to tell what's true and what isn't, because if you look at, like, let's say a Guardian article, for example, what I have specifically noticed in the Bay Area pointed out to me was that in a lot of these articles that go through the Guardian, New York Times, any of that stuff, if you roll the tape back and you go all the way to its inception of where, you know, this started, it's from a defector. Like the United Nations didn't say it, who are allowed in. The Chinese government didn't say it. The North Korean government didn't say it. Like there's not like a lot of journalistic integrity when it comes to South Korea or North Korea, because there's such a high profit motive to paint it as this incredibly dystopian, plague-ravaged regime. And the reason that we here in the West, i.e., or you know, the United States more specifically, do that is because we can't just straight up invade them anymore. They had this like North Korea is about the best case fucking scenario that could exist in terms of implementing communism. They implemented right after the USSR, you know, finished off World War II, and the United States finished off World War II. And then the USSR existed until 1991 to 92, depending on who you ask. And so they had this giant buffer. They're next door neighbors. It's not gonna fucking happen. So there's the USSR, there's Communist China, and there's North Korea, and all three of them are connected. So a ground invasion based on ideology was purely not going to happen. It wasn't. It's just not a thing the United States was going to get involved in. Vietnam's different. Vietnam did have a pretty anti-China sentiment, and then China actually wanted them to be a puppet, you know, this, that, the other thing, but that's a whole different story. The problem is that North Korea up until 1991 had a buffer. That's my argument, okay? And then after that buffer went away with the dissolution of the USSR, they still had China, but China was not a superpower then. Not like it is now. It was very, very different. And then what they had to do then was, how do we make ourselves uninvadable while we also no longer have a superpower behind us? And your next leap is usually what happens with places like that, like with Iran, for example, North Korea, Pakistan. You build nuclear weapons. And now North Korea has isolated its position to where it cannot, like, Could you invade North Korea? Yes. Could you conquer Korea? Yes. I have a buddy of mine who's not been, who was in the Air Force, that said if they ever launched a nuke at Seoul, they would within 36 hours become the world's biggest parking lot. And he's not wrong, I don't think. But what I am saying is that these sensationalized stories come from American media who have a vested interest in making sure that North Korea is demonized as much as it possibly can in order to gather support. But the problem is that North Korea, you cannot argue in any capacity from a military perspective that it's okay, from an ideological perspective that it's okay, or even from a humanitarian aspect that it's okay to invade them while you're sitting in the United fucking States. Like, even if everything all those defectors said were true, which has been shown to be not, there is no justification to invading North Korea. Millions of people will die. And not to mention the whole thing that fucking started it, if we're being frank, is the United States killed, if I'm not mistaken, when they invaded up the peninsula, killed about 40 to 45% of the Korean peninsula population. And I don't know how you really defend that.
Well,
like
I don't.
more people in more people on a multitude of like 5, 6, 7, 8 died in the Korean War than U.S. soldiers inflicted of casualties in World War II to the Nazis or the Japanese, like combined even.
Well, I don't think the argument is that we need to invade North Korea, and I know that Joan Stones said that he doesn't believe anything that she said. She's a celebrity defector and has been caught in insanely egregious lies. I'd like to know what those lies are, because the research that I've done, I know there's some speculation about her age, and it's Korean age versus American age, because
Their calendar's
Korea,
different.
Yeah, they have a different
in
calendar.
Korea, if you're born in December, you're 1, and then when it turns January, you're 2. So you're 2 months old, but you're really 2 years old. So I think there's some easy explanations behind that. I don't know.
Isn't it like if you did a year in the womb, you're a year old?
There's some
No.
there's
Something to that effect?
I think there might be some countries that like start the age like you're born at 9 months, like you're like 9 months
Yeah,
old.
like
so-
at conception
yeah.
is your birthday.
I know in Korea,
not
the way
birthday,
that she
but-
described it is when you're born, you're a year old, and then when you turn into the next calendar year, you gain a year. So again, if you're born in December, you're a year old, and then if you turn into January, you're now 2
Now you're
years
2?
old.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Yeah.
follow you.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I guess there is monetary gain there, but I don't know why you would. I don't know how you would be able to concoct these sorts of stories, and maybe that's not even the right thing to say. I guess why I believe her, and why when I watch her and she tells these stories, why I take her at full merit, is you can't leave North Korea, right? Like you can't leave. Once you're there, and they do not allow you to leave. You're a North Korean citizen. So if you want to go to South
Well,
Korea,
even that isn't like even that isn't like set in stone. Like there's some geopolitical maneuvering around that based on the fact that the two countries are still at war, technically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult to say like if like what you're saying, if I extrapolate from that, if they're running like a wartime economy, which I doubt, then yeah, you wouldn't be able to leave. You would not be allowed to leave.
Let me put it this way: in North Korea, you can't hop on a plane and just come to America.
But that's not the fault of North Korea. That's the
Okay.
fault of sanctions and embargoes.
Okay, so you can't hop on a plane and go.
You
to
and I
Spain.
can go to Pyongyang.
Correct.
We can go to Pyongyang.
Correct, and we can't videotape, we can't record, we can't take any pictures. They confiscate your phones, any sort of Polaroids. There's a documentary who took a trip to Pyongyang and took some pictures and some video, but it had to be extremely low key, because if they would have found out that he was documenting anything about his trip, he would have been executed right there and then, done. End of story.
You're talking about an expat, someone who's not a citizen of North Korea, like a member of the media,
Correct.
Yeah, he was a documentary. He like was there to make a documentary about it.
like threatened with going missing, like that kind of thing.
Correct. If you are not allowed to take pictures or video or document your experience in North Korea, and if you do, we will hold you here and you will be held accountable within our justice system. And if we find you guilty, you'll be executed.
But in the same breath, I mean, there's also like aerial drone footage that you can watch, like in the same way that there would be of like Vermont, of Pyongyang, of the southern countryside. I mean, it doesn't for me, it doesn't stack up. I'm not saying it's not happening. I'm saying that from the same way that you guys skeptically come at like certain issues, this is an issue that I think there from what I have read and from what I have seen, I'm not saying North Korea is a paradise. I'm not saying I would want to live there. I'm just saying that my argument boils down to that I think that stories often told by defectors, some of which who ended up going back because they were unhappy with capitalism, I would argue some of those stories, because of the monetary incentive to be grandiose, which some of them we know to not be true. Therefore, we should take that with the same grain of salt that we would take from anything else. North Korea, being its own sovereign nation, should not be the chink in our armor, so to speak, of being skeptical towards what the government wants us to believe. I think it's important to ask questions, and I think it's important to be first and foremost skeptical unless proven otherwise. And I would just say that a defector's story, and if I remember Park right, some of that definitely turned out to not be true. I'm not sure. I don't have the article pulled up in front of me, but as a result, we shouldn't build foreign policy on it. And also from a moral point of view, like I don't functionally hate anybody on the planet that I don't personally know enough to like fucking point a gun at. Like, I'm not saying North Korea's doing the, from my education, I am not saying that I support the North Korean regime. I am saying I distrust the United States and the painting it continues to attempt to make of an isolated third world country with an insignificant population and an insignificant effect on industry. Like, what threat could they possibly pose to me more than the Taliban? I know militarily that their rockets can't reach the West Coast. I don't think their rockets can even reach Japan. I think they crash into the South China Sea. Like, they're not a threat. Maybe it's a dictatorship, okay? But then what would you call something like Bosnia-Herzegovina or Greece in the late 80s and the early 2000s or late 90s? Like, I don't know, man. It gets real fucking muddled. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, and I think the conversation is different when you have allegedly, I suppose we'll use that term now, a dictator specifically and intentionally starving his civilians because he knows that everything is basically, you know, as your drive as a human, if you don't have food, you can't live. And so when you have a dictator, again, specifically and intentionally depriving his country of food while he continues to splash missiles into an ocean that could feed the entire nation for, you know, a handful of years, you get into a humanitarian issue where, again, we care about, or we claim to care about, you know, the welfare and the well-being on a global basis. And again, I'm not saying that I think we should go in and invade North Korea. I don't think that that's the issue, but I think that we can all agree that the shit they do is insanely shady. You can look at what was it, his brother that was running against him that just managed to get poisoned in an airport or whatever.
Yeah, he like assassinated him down in
Are you talking
Malaysia.
about his grandfather? Who
No.
was the chief of the army?
No, he
Not
had
his
like a
grandfather. I'm sorry. It was like great uncle, something to that effect.
no. He assassinated like his brother or brother-in-law or somebody like down in Malaysia.
Correct. I'm pretty sure it was his brother. I can look it up, but
Jamie,
I
Jamie,
just-
pull that up.
yeah,
Pull that
Yeah,
up.
pull that up. I just have a hard time believing that, and maybe some of what she said, I don't think that she's making it up. Let me just put it that way. But I also haven't dug into her life. Some of the stories that she tells, she's either an amazing fictional writer and can come up with some incredible type ideas and paint the picture of a Hunger Games type situation. But I think we do know that they think that Kim Jong-un controls the weather and that they all have to keep the picture of Kim Jong-un in their living room. And if dust collects on it, then they're subject to execution. And if there's a house fire, they have to run back in and grab that painting of Kim Jong-un before they grab anything else within their house. That to me paints a more believable picture than we're getting these defectors who are creating this grandiose type of situation to where they're just trying to monetize and make money by writing a book.
That narrative works if you accept the initial premise that North Korea is inherently a dictatorship, that they're inherently evil, and that Kim Jong-un inherently believes, or Kim Jong-il inherently believes that he is the son of God, which we don't have anything to back that up. We just have years of Cold War stuff to talk about.
Other than the stories of defectors.
Other than the stories of defectors, and then the certain media presences that have gone in. You can actually find them on YouTube. There are plenty of tours through North Korea that make it look like just a normal place with normal people. Like, and whether or not that's government orchestrated, what I'm saying is you have to build to that conclusion. You can't take that amorphous evidence and then base your worldview of the country on that. I'm saying that in the same way that I don't trust the United States government and what it has to fucking say because they've shown to be liars, I, in the same breath, because I am anti-imperialist, have to give the North Koreans the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying it's good to live there. I don't know anything about it. But what I don't believe, I'm not saying what I do believe. What I'm saying is what I don't believe is that they are an inherently evil empire deserved of being destroyed. Because that information just simply, I've never seen it. Because the same people who usually argue that also argue against China. China is far less isolated and it's way easier accessible, like in terms of information, all that stuff. And a lot of that shit has just been like, it's just laughably bad. Like, and what's so funny to me is that so many people, like I would say my libertarian friends and my conservative friends in particular, love to shit all over China for human rights violations. And then China always claps back with like, we've never killed anybody in a camp. Like, we've never genocided anybody. Like, all your products are made here. And we are willing to give you tours of our country if the UN is that worried about it, and of which the UN is not. Look at Portugal. Look at Greece. Like,
I feel like
the biggest problem. I'll just finish this sentence.
Sure,
I'll let you go, Ben. The biggest problem that we have with a country like China is they are a superpower. We might not call them that today, but there will be a day very soon where they are referred to as such, and that is purely because of the reach of their economic policy and like what they've been doing over the last 20 years. You know, whether it's the string of pearls strategy, like you want to call it, building military bases and trade outposts, or like outright buying ports like Dieppe, Le Havre, Thrace in Greece. Like, they're buying up so many fucking assets in the trade routes specifically, not different than the Dutch or the Portuguese did when colonizing the New World, but like they represent an economic problem for the United States. Absolutely. They don't run on capitalism. They run on what I would argue is state-run capitalism underneath like communist dictatorship. But what I'm saying is like the same things that we see said about China are the same things that we see said about North Korea, which are the same things that we heard about Poland, Hungary, the former Czech Republic, the USSR. Like we've heard this fucking song and dance before, man. And it's like nearly never true. That's not to dispel any tragedies that have ever happened, but people aren't like leaning back in leather chairs, cackling about how much human suffering they're causing. Like that's comical to me. That's our foreign policy agenda when it comes to anyone who doesn't bend the knee to the United States.
As far as I guess I would circle back to the things about like China not killing anybody, I feel like the Uyghur Muslims in the far western reaches of China would like to have a word, because they are being persecuted and imprisoned and sterilized and raped on the daily out there. And I don't think any of those people, any of the Uyghurs that have escaped out of those areas would come to any country in the West and lie about their experience that they found over there watching family members or friends get executed and brutally raped and have unspeakable violence told like happen against them.
So the Uyghur example is exactly like the North Korean example, whereby we have to go on firsthand accounts. Like Bay Area does a really, really good job. He covers actually like this topic. I don't know what you like the three of us would phrase it as, but he covers this topic really well. And the conclusion that I have kind of come to is I don't trust the official opinion of the United States government because they've done nothing but fuck everything up since World War II. And on top of that, a lot of the stories from the Uyghurs, especially if you look at Andrew Zenz, who is a German, he's a German sociologist. A lot of papers that deal with what is going on with the Uyghurs in China, inevitably, if you follow that citation page all the way to its end, go to him, Adrian Zenz, a man who has never lived outside of Germany, who is supposedly an expert on what is going on in China. Like Xi Jinping personally invited him to tour that region of the country about 3 or 4 years ago. He turned that down. What I think the more appropriate narrative is it is a good thing to demonize China at the moment, because we have recently realized that in the same way that the Chinese government did, that region, Xinjiang of China, is home to possibly the largest natural gas and petroleum reserve on the fucking planet. We did not know that 10 years ago. I don't know if we knew it 5 years ago. We do know it now. And I would argue that the attempts to vilify and the attempts to demonize these other nations are almost always from a Euro-American centric worldview. And I just don't think they hold up to scrutiny. I just really don't think that they do.
China has come out and said that they do have Uyghurs in prison camps called re-education camps aimed at changing the political thinking of their detainees, their identities, and their religious beliefs. The focus of the camps is to ensure the adherence to the Chinese Communist Party and ideology. I mean, that's coming from them.
Yeah, reform camps are different.
I'm looking at pictures of suspected Uyghurs from China's far western regions of Xinjiang rest inside a temporary shelter after they were detained at the immigration regional headquarters near the Thailand-Malaysia border in March of 2014. Like, I don't think this is all just hearsay. And again, I hear your sentiment when you say I don't trust the narratives that's being painted by the American government. I'm with you. So again, take out Uyghurs, insert vaccination, right? Like you again,
what we agreed on was ideologically it's very difficult to combat that because that has a pretty fucking stone
correct
basis.
But if you were looking at data, if you were looking at a picture of data or pictures of people, you know, who were dead in hospital rooms after taking the vaccination, I'd say, well, then, yeah, these people have a pretty good leg to stand on. It's not just the incompetence of the American government and the narrative that's being painted. I don't think there's enough room to say that because of the narrative that the American government is painting of North Korea and China in this specific situation, that, well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. I think that there is some pretty hard-hitting evidence that would go to say that I fucking hate China and I fucking hate North Korea. And I do think that especially that cuck Kim Jong-un is sitting back in his leather chair while he rounds up virgins and brings them to the Capitol, and while he eats his X amount of meals per day and sits there and keeps his population in control by starving them. If I'm missing the boat here, I'd love to have the evidence that would support against that, but I don't think that you can make an argument that the Uyghurs are not being rounded up and that they're not being put in re-education camps, trying to get them to fall in line with the Communist Party regime in China. And we have enough.
No, that's the whole goal. That's
Yeah.
the entire goal. It's called de-Islamification, or if you go further back in history, Sinization. Those are the two terms for it. It's basically, what do we do to separate ourselves from Europe, because Europe is plagued with Muslim terrorists? How do we stop that shit? And how do we do it in a humane manner? You and I may disagree over whether or not that's humane, because a large subsection of the Uyghur population happen to also be influenced by Islam and also happen to be directly funded by the US Department of Defense through Pakistan and Afghanistan and through the Taliban. And they would love nothing more than to blow up those railway stations, those refineries. Like, China is attempting to be pragmatic and trying to be forward thinking with, if we show them a better way and we re-educate them and we Sinize them into our population, there's a far less chance of them being radicalized. If you want to flip the problem on its head, it's kind of, what do we do to stop white supremacist terrorists like Christchurch? Like, you could easily do that with it. And their solution to that is, these people require education. These people require infrastructure. These people require security. They're not going to turn to radical Islam, and they're not going to be bombing oil refineries with their fucking chest if they have needs met and have prospects and can build relations. If you want to look at it that way, we're totally in agreement. I do not believe that rounding up any sort of population is without its drawbacks. And I would argue it's probably unnecessary. But in the same breath, what China is doing is preemptive and not after the fact. It's kind of the same situation that we have here with refugees, or the same situation we would have if after 9/11, for example, or World War II, for a real example, when we interned Japanese citizens because we were worried that they were going to support the Japanese. And they're like, dude, I was born in fucking San Francisco. I've never even been to Japan. Like, why the fuck am I here? Like, I don't believe the official fucking letterhead of that entity. And that entity happens to be the United States government. But again, like I brought up earlier, there's a YouTuber, I'll plug him again, I'm sure, but Bay Area, he's super good. He's done a lot of videos about this specific subject. And I'm not saying, Alex, Ben, I'm not saying bad things aren't happening there. And I'm not saying it's good. What I'm saying is, if the point is to decalcify and to bring to heed radical Islam, then I don't think our state would be doing anything different.
I mean, I can see that because we did the same thing with the Japanese in World War II. People that had been living here for years, and we put them in internment camps with no basis for anything.
I'm not
So,
saying it's right. I'm just saying the official narrative is fucking bollocks, dude.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think we can agree on that, I don't trust any official narrative that comes out of the United States government. I mean, look at where we're at with, again, different topic, but similar in the sense of, oh, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. You have videos, but we're just going to say that is wrong with what you're thinking of. Like UFOs were finally, admitting that, hey, we've been chasing these things for a while, right? They lied to us about that for years. So again,
what came to fruition on that? I'm sure you dug into that. What'd you figure out?
And I think just to put to bed the last topic, I think we can agree to disagree on a few things, but still agree on the official narrative side of things. I still fucking hate Kim Jong-un, and I think China's a superpower trying to take over the world. There, period, end of story. UFOs, New York Times changed the narrative on UFOs big time when they came out with that piece and basically said, we do have materials that are not from this earth that we have in store. I can't exactly remember. We have access to, we're possessing as a nation. And for the first time in American history, it started to be thought of as, okay, well, this is real, because the New York Times completely flipped the script on the idea of, like, if you believe in UFOs, you're a wacko, and you probably, think that the world's flat also. That changed the narrative a lot on the whole. What do they call it now? UAPs or something?
Unidentified aerial phenomena or something like that.
Yeah, they did the thing where they changed the name of it, because we don't want to call it UFOs and acknowledge the fact that, yeah, we've just been fucking bold-faced lying to you for all these years. So now we're gonna call them UAPs. And
what's so interesting to me about that subject is that, like, if we're talking, you guys might like this. So if we're talking about a civilization that has the capacity to traverse and exceed, like, light speed, right? Like that's the type of civilization we're talking about.
Yeah.
The nearest habitable planet by our, like, most generous estimates is lifetimes away, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is insane is the idea that, like, I mean, of course aliens exist. That's a numerical, like, what's the problem called, Alex? We learned about it in psychology.
I don't know. I feel like it's a statistical improbability for us to be the only living things
to be
in
the only
universe.
The monkey typewriter problem. That's what it is. Is if you give an infinite amount of monkeys an infinite amount of typewriters and an infinite amount of time, one of them will produce the works of Shakespeare without a single misspelling. Like, the math checks out on that. So, like, the idea that there can't be other civilizations is fucking bananas. That doesn't work. That doesn't pan out. The math is, it's improbable that we're the only thing that have ever existed
in the entirety of the universe.
Yeah, but what I think is fucking nuts is that when people spot UFOs, or, like Alex was just saying, they release, like, classified information. I think it's fucking crazy from a not an ideological perspective, but, like, a psychological perspective of, like, when was the last time that you got out of your car and pulled over on a highway to talk to an anthill?
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that's
what could possibly be gained other than tourism. You know what I mean? Like, that's bananas.
Well, you open the realm of the topic of discussion of, why would they be here? We would be such insignificant beings. I think a good argument would be if we were watching those same, if we were studying those ants like we do, and we saw one ant colony getting to the top of a hill and another ant colony getting to the top of a hill, and they were just slowly destroying themselves, and to the point where they were non-existent. At what point in time do we step in and say, hey, we kind of like watching you ants. So, there's some interesting studies to be done here. So we need to step in.
Maybe don't
And,
kill each other.
Let's maybe move this colony to a different anthill. And again, you open up the whole realm of topic. I personally think that it's a more advanced civilization of ourselves, that we got to a certain point in future and we fucking either cause extreme famine or execution, or we brought civilization to the brink of its knees.
Let me be clear.
There's
The only reason to send a time traveler back would be Terminator style to kill Jeff Bezos. That would be the only way to do it, because climate change is going to kill all of us slowly, surely, and we'll live relatively comfortably through it. But it's over, man.
There's a very interesting uptick in more documented cases of alien activity, alien speaking, not like, again, I'm not saying like Mars attacks, but after the first nuclear bombs were launched, there's a noticeable uptick in reports of alien abduction, alien activity. There's a lot of Commander Fravor chasing the Tic Tac video, very well established. Fighter pilot in the Air Force chases this thing around. They have him on radar, and they're like, we can't figure out what this is. They're freaked out by it. They're radioing back to base, and they're like, yeah, we've been chasing this thing around. And then by the time that they get done on this exercise, the fucking thing comes all the way back to their scramble point where they were supposed to start the exercise, basically just to be like, hey, I knew you guys were supposed to be here. And they're all, what the fuck? Again, video evidence, we can turn back and look and say, okay, something is fucking going on that's really weird here. We're chasing these crafts that have zero propulsion. They're not moving like we are. It's not a combustion engine like we think of. They're moving and communicating in a way that's way different than what we know or could even have in the realm of being able to fathom. And like you said, yeah, it's 1,000%. Why they're here, I don't know. I also think it's very interesting that they're spotted out over water, going in and out of water. Maybe they're fucking harvesting water. I don't know what they're doing. I don't think that's, talk about being able to monetize and write a book. If you knew why they were coming, you'd be the most fucking famous person on the planet. But
isn't there there's some sort of paradox about it where
I think Joan Stones just mentioned it in the chat. Also, Jesus, I think you are right about the Animation being a Goosebumps book or TV, and also hi. It's okay. It's okay that you're late. We don't hate you for it. Joan Stones said that is it the Fermi paradox?
Yeah.
He's like Fermi paradox prevents a lot of problems, but also if aliens exist and they are able to reach our solar system, they have either incredibly long life cycles or reproducing on spacecrafts, and he said, and are indubitably communists.
Well, first off, yes. The second part, that if you can't traverse space and time and not be a supporter of fully automated luxury gay space communism. Straight men, no, it's over for you. I'm sorry. You've outlived your usefulness, especially straight white men. In gay space communism, we don't have that. No, sir. Well, Dan, are you the exception? No, absolutely not. They'll rip me apart. They'll be like, we agree with you, but this is for the best. And I'll go, okay.
You're right.
I know I'm right. I know that this is how it would work. Anyway, that paradox. There's also another. I don't know if it's the same one, but one of those paradoxical papers goes on to state that there are certain barriers in a civilization's life cycle that we can theorize would have to exist to acquire the technology to even perform space travel. For example, a really good example would be the Dyson sphere. Harness the power of your own sun. There's no universe where, think about it this way. If we wanted to travel to Alpha Centauri today, right now, we would use hydrogen engines, gas, natural gas. And that's going to get you there? I don't think so. It would require such such immense societal cohesion and agreement and ideology and economy that it's difficult to even fathom a species that could, because we're the only one we have to go off of. But like that being said, and all things being equal, I believe that it's a distinct possibility that other life forms have reached our planet, but I also think a lot of that had to do with the Cold War. One of the best examples is the U-2 spy plane the United States invented. That is, I don't think it might not be used today.
They don't use the Blackbird anymore.
But it was like decades ahead of anything the Soviets could detect. That by the time they first shot one down, and that pilot was like, "I'm a tourist," and they're like, "LOL, okay, dude." Like, you remember that shit? They fucking had to like escort him up to the edge of the fucking Berlin Wall and be like, "All right, get out of here, get out of here." But I think a lot of it is probably people experimenting with that kind of technological diversity. I mean, if we can crack, this is also coming directly after the wake of the atom bomb. If we can do the atom bomb, what else can we do? Even if it's not good, but I don't think it's impossible that certain countries experimented with, because you have to remember, radar was not invented until like 42. So like this small window of time, this 80 years has been fucking bananas. Like, I don't know.
Are you familiar with Bob Lazar at all?
Fill me in.
He worked at Los Alamos, and the U.S. government did a really good job of trying to disprove the fact that he ever worked there. He was basically a guy that was contracted by Los Alamos, which is like, think of like an Area 51. I don't know what the official name of those centers are. Research center.
It's like an R&D basically for the military.
If there is an official name, none of us would know it.
Yeah. But they basically contacted Bob Lazar to come work there because the man put a jet engine in the back of a Honda Civic.
Correct.
And they were like, "Oh, this dude thinks outside the box. Maybe he could reverse engineer some of the shit we got."
So they basically had found a motor, and they hired Bob Lazar to work with one other guy to reverse engineer this motor. And the way that he described it, it's an anti-propulsion machine. So there's no, again, the way that we think of like
there's no emission. It would be like
there's no combustion to get it to move.
It would have to move electromagnetically. You would think.
The way he describes it is like if you went back to the Cherokee Indians and gave them a Yamaha motorcycle, they could probably figure out after a while how to turn it on, and they could probably figure out how to make it go. And they could probably end up, after a few years riding around on it and being like, "Hey, this is kind of cool. We can drive places."
You're talking about like reverse engineering. Yeah.
Correct. But they wouldn't be able to sit again and recreate that engine or that device because they just wouldn't understand how it works. And that's basically what he claims, that he was working on a motor, an engine similar to that is this anti-gravity type propulsion machine that they can't really figure out how to make it work, but they know what it does and they can turn it on, but they can't reverse engineer it. And there's a lot of research Bob Lazar in your free time, because there's a lot of really interesting shit that guy talks about. Between Bob Lazar and Commander Fravor, I'm sold on the fact that, like, I don't know why they're here. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what kind of interests they have in us. If it's us in a future form, trying to come back in time and say, "Hey, quit fucking with each other because you're going to lead to the demise of humanity," or if they are harvesting water, or if they're, just we're like a zoo to them and people pay to go see the humans. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing here, but they're here for whatever reason.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a disagreement with it. I think that there's a rational explanation that some may accept, and I think there's a totally justifiable other explanation, which is, like we talked about, infinite monkey theorem, yada yada. I think they're both perfectly fine. I think they're both perfectly understandable. So it's like, yeah, I would agree with you on that. They're absolutely aliens. I don't know if they've necessarily been here yet, or why they would come here.
Oh,
'Cause
they've been here, Dan.
you would imagine though that a species that has the wherewithal to harvest the power of its own sun would also have the capacity to like invent water out of nothing. Like we would call it alchemy, but they would just call it
Science.
transmutation.
Yeah, who knows? Anyway, we're at 2 hours.
Yes, sir. We are. Yeah, I don't really have anything else, chat. If you guys have anything else for us, like, let us
Say
know.
let's-
But
Let's turn
other,
it over to chat.
other than that, I think we're pretty much like good up for this week. Appreciate you guys hanging out and listening to us ramble on about everything. If you guys have any, yeah, like we said, if you have anything else for us, let us know. As always, if there's something that happens during the week, you want Alex and I to talk about it on our next episode, our socials are at the end. Just ping us on there, slide in the DMs, and let us know. YouTube, from our YouTube audience, appreciate you guys. Thanks for all the support that you give us in viewing the videos and leaving likes and comments. Continue to do that and spread our humble podcast out to the masses.
I'm gonna tease Spike Cohen's coming back on.
True.
I got a messages guy tonight. Spike Cohen's coming back, so we'll have another interview with him coming up here soon.
Very cool. I'm excited for that. I like talking with Spike. But yeah, if you guys, it's not looking like it, you guys don't have anything else for us, I am going to call that one good for this week. And we will see you guys next Sunday, same place, same time. And we'll go over what in the world happened for the week. And maybe it'll be something different than COVID.
Probably not.
Probably not, because that seems to be our lives right now. Anyways, love you guys. Be safe. Have a good week. And we will see you all next week. All right? Peace.
Be good to each other.